Good evening, doctors. On behalf of Bharat Serum and Vaccines, myself, Dr. Shashwata Banerjee, welcome all of you in this evening webinar. We have named it as Crosstalks. And the topic of today's discussion is COVID-19 associated mucormycosis. I'm sure every now and then, those who are associated with intensive care, critical care, ENT, and ophthalmology, you are getting a lot of cases of mucormycosis these days. This surge has happened in recent time, and we are seeing a lot of cases are being reported in news medias, in the TV channels, in the newspapers, many places, including the medical journals. So that's why we thought to have a focused discussion from the different aspects of mucormycosis, keeping the COVID-19 as the key area which is attributing the surge of COVID mucormycosis cases. To conduct the session today, to moderate the session, we have today Dr. Venkatraman Kola. He will be moderating the session. My role is to introduce Dr. Venkatraman, our moderator for the evening, and then I'll hand over the entire session to him. Now he will take it forward. Very briefly about Dr. Venkatraman Kola. Currently, Dr. Venkatraman Kola is the clinical director in the Department of Critical Care Medicine in the Yashoda Hospital, Bangalore, Hyderabad, sorry. He earlier was the head of the department in the Department of Critical Care Medicine in Care Hospital, Banjara Hills, Hyderabad. Also served as the HOD and consultant in the Critical Care Medicine and Intensive Care Unit in Continental Hospital in Hyderabad. Also, in the past, he has served as the consultant in critical care in Apollo Hospital, consultant in the Medical Intensive Care Unit, Guru Nanak Care Hospital in Secunderabad, and prior to that, he served as the senior registered in the critical care medicine in Hyderabad in Oakard Hospital. By qualification, Dr. Venkatraman has completed MD followed by DNB and IDCCM and EDIC. He is also the clinical director. He has conducted many research and presented paper in many national and international conferences. Some of them are like, Criticare in different times in 2018, 19, 2020, in Moha Criticon, in Work of Brussels, Epicon, many such conferences. And he has also been participated in various ISCCM related activities, also been part of the international conferences like ESICM, IDSA in US. He's also a very famous examiner in many critical related courses and member of various notable bodies like ISCCM, ESICM, Indian Medical Association, and IDSA. Now, I hand over the session to Venkatraman for taking this forward. My request to audience would be, while our speakers are speaking and presenting, keep your microphone and videos in mute, and you can use the chat box. You can use that to put questions, and our speakers and moderator would take these during the question answer session. Over to you, Dr. Venkatraman.
Yeah, good evening, and thank you, Dr. Shashwata Banerjee, for those kind words. I think the new normal became a normal for all of us. Spent almost more than a year and a half, and the new normal continues to be normal for all of us. Last probably a couple of months, from March onwards, we are budging a new ward in the name of black fungus, and I believe that not created a havoc on the medical fraternity, but also in the common man and in the media. The names were a little surprising to me when it came to the newspapers, in media, people calling me asking what is a black fungus. I was trying to explain them what black fungus are. Then they said, no, there is a mucormycosis is called nowadays black fungus. You don't know that. So I have to learn it from the media that mucormycosis can also be called as a black fungus. And scientifically, the terminology doesn't fit into it. The skin or tissue looks black. The reason is it necrotizes or occludes the vessels supplying the particular tissue and coloring the tissue as black, but the fungus itself doesn't have any pigment to color it black. The same way we have gone through white fungus and newly many colors of rainbows in the recent times. I'm not sure what these colors has made to be and what is the rationale behind these colors, but definitely yes, we have treated around 25 to 30,000 cases of COVID from last 1.5 year in our 3 units of Yashoda group here. And I was actively participating in intensive care where almost each hospital at a particular time was running around 450 to 500 beds with around 300 intensive ventilated beds. And in the last 2 months, we have seen a definite surge in number of fungal cases. And that probably also matched the surge of COVID cases in the country and in our region. And it also turned to be a lot of stress on many areas, including the treatment. We had a big challenge almost a month back when there was a lot of limitation in getting a regular amphotericin B or a liposomal amphotericin B or alternative drugs also. And we have to write a big form to the government of Telangana where DMHO will evaluate and then issue the vials if they believe and they feel that the patient is deserved to get those medication. And then only we used to get these medicines. And that being a challenge, and there were a lot of debates across. So at the right time, probably the Bharat Serum has brought this issue. So we have to start with a good set of panelists, but we will start with Vasant Kumar ji, who actually will talk to us about epidemiology and the current status of this, the fungus, that mucormycosis, how it is creating a havoc in the current second wave of COVID-19. Welcome you, Dr. Vasant Kumar sir, to the board, and over to you. Then we will take the questions and probably interact later part.
Thank you, Dr. Pola, for the brief introduction. Shall I start the presentation?
Yes, sir.
I'm sharing the screen. My screen is visible?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Yeah. Good evening, friends. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Bharat Serum and Group, and the listeners, the technicians, and the moderators, and the panelist members for giving this golden opportunity to speak about a very hot topic at this point of time in this COVID season, and especially there's a emerging and a rise in the fungal infections, especially the mucormycosis. So I will talk about the epidemiology and the patient risk factors about the mucormycosis. So let's have a basic facts before we go into the core topic. There is an increased incidence of fungal infections in the recent past, especially after COVID-19. And there is a changing spectra of the fungal disease as a newer pathogens are emerging. And the selection of fungi is due to widespread use of azole is a reality. Rise in resistance of fungi and there is a cross resistance is increasingly recognized in the recent past. And then the unique epidemiology is totally underscored, and the new patient profile in the view of COVID-19. So let's see about the evolving invasive fungal infections. So the top on the list is the invasive candidiasis, and in the candidiasis, previously albicans, the number was quite high, but now there was a switch over from the albicans to a non-albicans. And next in the box is the aspergillosis. In the aspergillosis, there are so many species right from Niger, flavors, fumigators, and now the non-fumigatous group has increased. And next is the mucormycosis and the zygomycosis, and then the hyphomycosis and phaeohyphomycosis, followed by xerosporiosis and other mold infections. Today we will concentrate only on the mucormycosis or the zygomycosis. So what is mucormycosis? Mucormycosis is an emerging angio-invasive infection caused by the ubiquitous filamentous fungi of the mucorales, order of the class Zygomycetes, hence the name mucormycosis. Dr. Kola rightly pointed out that the black fungus, which is colloquially called in the media and by the lay persons, is a totally is a misnomer. Since it is an angio-invasive, it involves the tissues and then the blood vessels, and then there will be a ischemia, and then eventually there is a necrosis of the tissues, and then there is a gangrene. Because of the appearance, it is the skin tissue appears black, so people call it as black fungus, but actually it is not a black fungus, it is a misnomer. And it is emerged as a third most common invasive mycosis in the order of importance after candidiasis and aspergillosis. So this is the structure of the mucor. You can able to see the top one, it is the sporangium, which produces the spores, and then it is the sporangiophore, the stalk-like structure, and which is attached to the hyphae, the prostrate and the subterranean hyphae. And this hyphae, it's very fragile and it is aseptate. So that is the main reason behind it. It is very difficult to isolate in the laboratory. So even though there is an infection in the body, it is difficult to isolate in the laboratory. So there's a chance of missing the mucor infections. And let's see about the epidemiology. It is ubiquitous in soil. It is found everywhere. It is commonly found in the dead and decaying organic matters such as fruits and bread. It's grow rapidly on virtually any carbohydrate substrates, and it has the ability to grow at a temperature above 37 degrees Celsius. These properties of wide ecological distribution, rapid growth, and the thermotolerance are of particular importance in the developing human diseases. In the largest review of the mucormycosis case in the English literature by Roden et al., compiled 929 cases of mucor between 1885 to 2004, shows an increasing proportion of immunocompromised patients with mucor between 1980s to 90s. If you compare the Indian data, 40% contributes to the global burden of the disease. And there is alarming increase in the incidence of mucormycosis cases in India from 13 cases per year between 1991 to 2000 and 36 cases per year between 2001 to 2005 and 50 cases per year between 2006 and 7. In an Indian literature review across 5 decades, the mucormycosis prevalence was about 0.14 cases per 1,000 population, ranging between the 2,08,177 to 1,37,807 cases has been reported, with 65,500 attributable to deaths per year. The mortality is roughly around 40%. The incidence is extraordinarily high, almost above 70 times to be generally accepted rate. The exact incidence of mucormycosis in India is unknown, and around 70 times higher estimated prevalence of mucormycosis in India than the global data. And if you see the risk factors, the commonest risk factor is the patient with high glucose levels. So diabetes mellitus is the commonest risk for developing this fungus, and followed by hematological malignancies and solid organ transplant, and patient with immunosuppressants like steroids, or patients receiving other immunosuppressants, especially post-transplant with cyclosporines, tacrolimus, sirolimus, or everolimus. And recently, this COVID surge, viral illness per se, will lead to immunosuppressions. And because of COVID, because of cytokine storm, there was extensive use of steroids. And that is also another reason behind the development of this surge in the cases of mucor. An additional risk factor is post-pulmonary tuberculosis and CKD. And trauma is also independent risk factor for cutaneous mucormycosis. And there is isolated renal mucormycosis in an immunocompetent host, a unique entity in India. And among the species, Rhizophus arisis is the commonest etiological agent. There are so many species in the mucor, like Rhizophus, and then there is Cunninghamula, and Saxena. And among this, Cunningham is highly and most virulent species. And this Haraceus species is the most common etiological agent in the mucor. So diabetes is the highest risk factor, and then if the patient with diabetic presented with the DKA, then the risk factor is furthermore. And steroid-induced diabetes also will increase the risk. The incidence of mucor is coming down in West, possibly due to widespread of use of statins, which inhibits the mucormycetes, is a considerable, is also the hypothesis also has been postulated. And in the DKA and the patient treated with iron also predisposed to mucormycosis, because this iron content in the blood will also act as a source of the culture media for the fungus to grow. And especially in COVID patients, because of inflammation, because of cytokine storm, there is a elevated ferritin level. So that is also another hypothesis postulated behind the rise in the surge of the mucor infections. Because of the elevated level of serum glucose, iron, and the beta hydroxybutyrate, it augments the fungal growth and it acts as a culture media, and it enhances the expressions of glucose regulator protein, the GRP78 and spore coating proteins, which results in increased ability of the mucorales to invade the host tissue. If you see the clinical form of mucormycosis in India, the ROCM, that is the rhino-oculocerebral mucormycosis, is the commonest form. It ranges from 45 to 74%. And next is the cutaneous form, the range from 10 to 31%. And then next is the pulmonary mucormycosis, the range from 3 to 22%. And the renal is 0.5 to 9%. And next is the gastrointestinal mucormycosis. The percentage is somewhere between 2 to 8%. And in the gastrointestinal, the stomach is the commonest organ involved, and next is followed by the colon and the ileum. And then next is the disseminated mucormycosis. The percentage is 0.5 to 9%. And usually in the pulmonary mucormycosis and gastrointestinal, there is extensive involvement of the lung tissue, and it involves the blood vessels. So eventually what will happen, there is a angio invasion, and then there is a ischemia to the lung tissues, and then it presents as a necrosis, and then the patients in the bowel, the patients will present as a bowel gangrene. And this graph shows the risk factor and the various group of mucormycosis. For ROCM, the diabetes stands highest risk factor for rhino-oculocerebral mucormycosis. For pulmonary mucormycosis, the solid organ transplant recipients, hematological malignancies, and diabetes mellitus is the highest risk factor. And for cutaneous mucormycosis, trauma is the main risk factor. You can see the graph based on the studies by Chakrabarty et al. Study published in the year 2001, 6, 2009, and Prakash et al. 2019, and Patel et al. In the year 2020. You can see the graph, the mortality rate in different clinical form of mucormycosis. The mortality rate of mucormycosis in India is roughly between 28% to 52%. But now in this COVID season, even in our hospital, so we had almost like 80 to 90% mortality, because the patient is not only having mucormycosis, the patient is also having a very severe ARDS because of this COVID lung, and the patient is also having a cytokine storm, and then eventually the patient is having fibrosis, and this add to the mortality and morbidity. So for ROCM, it is 31 to 14% mortality, and for the pulmonary mucormycosis, the mortality ranges between 61% to 77%, and for cutaneous mucormycosis, the mortality ranges between 23% to 57%. For gastrointestinal, 67% to 94%, the mortality is quite high. Since stomach is most commonly involved, the patient's nutrition also will be very badly affected. So eventually the patients will go for cachexia, and then patients will die because of malnutrition and sepsis. And for disseminated mucormycosis, the mortality also is very, very high. You can able to see the model of therapy and mortality rate in the mucormycosis. So I will not go in detail about the treatment aspects, because Dr. Chintan and Dr. Matthew will cover the subsequent session. And you can able to appreciate, based on the study by Priya et al. And Patel et al. And Prakash et al. And Chakrabarti et al. You can see the grayish one, the mortality is less. It's almost 18.8% as against 50% based on the studies by Priya et al. And for Patel et al., the mortality is 43.7% for combination therapy of surgery and amphotericin B. So combination therapy, that is early debridement and antifungal therapy, the mortality rate will be very, very lower. You can able to appreciate the higher survival with the combined approach. Based on the graph, you can able to see the higher survival probability with combined medical and surgical treatment. And if you see the mortality on the 90-day in the participants with mucormycosis who underwent combined medical and surgical management versus those managed medically alone, the time to death was significantly less in those managed only medically. And next you will have brief discussions about the number of cases, and this was published in the Times of India newspaper. The COVID deadly companion, the surge of COVID-19 in its second wave has also left a trail of disease and the death in the form of black fungus or mucormycosis. You can able to see this is the data extracted till May 2019. In the Maharashtra, the number of cases is around 1,500, and in Gujarat it is 1,500, and in Telangana it is 700 cases, and in Madhya Pradesh it is around 573, and Karnataka it is 250, and Delhi it is 200, and Haryana it is 190, and Odisha, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Goa in less than 10. Among the death rates, Maharashtra stands high. Around 90 patients died because of this mucor, and Haryana it is 14, and for Uttar Pradesh it's around 8, for Chhattisgarh it's 2, Madhya Pradesh it's 2, and Jharkhand it's 4, and Uttarakhand it's 2, Bihar, Assam, Odisha and Goa it is only 1. So state have declared it is an epidemic is Rajasthan, Gujarat and Odisha, and state facing shortage of liposomal amphotericin B is Delhi, Goa, Gujarat, Karnataka and Kerala. And states that have declared it as a notifiable diseases Haryana, Karnataka, Punjab, Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu and Telangana. And in this slide, you can able to see the postulated interaction of diabetes, corticosteroids and COVID-19 with mucormycosis. For COVID-19, there is a cytokine storm, and because of cytokine storm, there is increase in interleukins and cytokines, especially the IL-6. And then this increases the ferritin synthesis and iron transport, and because of this ferritin level is increased, and ferritin is nothing but this is the storage form of reserve iron, and because of this increased intracellular free iron, there is a good culture media to the fungus to grow. And not only this endogenous ferritin level, and because of exogenous iron and dextrose and iron sucrose by the clinicians who prescribe for the COVID patients as a supplements, that also will augment the growth of mucormycosis. And next, this hyperglycemia and acidosis. This is a deadly combination. So patient with DKA. Recently, last week, we lost one young chap around 25 years. He presented with the COVID pneumonia. Initially, he was managed with conservatively with 15 liter of oxygen. Was doing good, but he had hypertension and diabetes as a comorbid conditions. And during the course of illness, what happened? He had a severe hyperglycemia, and eventually he had a sepsis and DKA. And this augments the growth of fungus. So then later he developed this black fungus, that is the mucormycosis, and he died eventually. In spite of antifungal and debridement, the patient, we lost the patient. And next hypothesis is the hypoxia lymphopenia, which suppresses the CD4 and CD8 T cells, and that also will augment the growth of fungus. And then this, I already told, this DKA and even metabolic acidosis. Patient with severe starvation or patient with dehydration. That is also important part of COVID. So if you are not giving adequate fluid balance and nutrition balance, any acid media that augments the growth of this fungus. And next is the corticosteroids. So based on the recovery trial, dexamethasone is recommended for this COVID patients, but many clinicians use steroids for extended duration and as well as for at higher doses, especially with this Solumedrol. If they use for 125 mg 6th hourly or 8th hourly, and for like more than 10 days, for even for weeks or months, some clinicians prescribe. So that is also another contributing factor for this increase in surge of mucormycosis. So mucormycosis and COVID-19 in India, the new coronavirus leads to dysregulated innate immune response, and there is a ciliary dysfunction, and there is a cytokine storm, and then there is a thromboinflammation and microvascular coagulation and eventual immune exhaustion. This may serve as a risk factor for chronic respiratory disease, and use of corticosteroid therapy, immunomodulators like tocilizumab, bevacizumab, and itolizumab, and mechanical ventilation and long oxygen therapy, and then the deranged glucose metabolism. Majority of the patients developed mucormycosis after COVID hospitalizations, and few cases during the hospitalization period. And among the male-female ratio, male showed a little bit higher incidence of these fungal infections, and the age group middle age to older, age greater than 40 years. And most patients are diabetics. This is the demographic profile of the patients with mucor. So mucormycosis is surging in different states with high COVID-19 cases. The National COVID-19 Task Force issued an evidence-based advisory on the disease, and notifiable disease declared in some states like Tamil Nadu, Telangana, and Karnataka. Preventive measures directed towards COVID-19 prevention, treatment, and hand hygiene. There is no antifungal prophylaxis recommended for mucormycosis infection. So to sum up, mucormycosis is not a black fungus, it is a misnomer. It is angioinvasive, also called as phycomycosis or zygomycosis. It is the third most common angioinvasive, third most common invasive fungi after Candida and Aspergillus infection. The prevalence of the infection is 0.14 cases per 1,000 population in India. Rhizophus arices is the commonest species, even though some species like Mucor, Rhizophus, and species like Cunninghamella and species like Saxena. And among the species, arices is the least invasive fungus, and this Cunninghamella species is highly virulent and very dreadful variant. And if you see the risk factor, diabetes mellitus presented with ketoacidosis, or patient presented with metabolic acidosis, on patient with extensive use of steroids, patient presented with malignancies like hematopoietic malignancies or stem cell transplant, post-transplant patients receiving immunosuppressants like cyclosporins and tacrolimus, and excessive use of supplements and micronutrients like iron and zinc. And next is the dirty linen and water contamination in the humidifier. That is also called a variant called hospital acquired or healthcare associated mucor. And last but not the least is the trauma, which is the most common etiological agent for the cutaneous mucormycosis. In the epidemic, in the pandemic, noted in the Rajasthan, Odisha, and Gujarat, and notifiable disease Mucor is noted as a notifiable disease in the states of Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Telangana. Thank you very much for this golden opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Vasant Kumar, for that wonderful overview of epidemiology and risk factor. Dr. Vasant Kumar was a senior consultant from Meenakshi Hospital, Tanjore. He brought all his expertise from Tanjore Meenakshi Hospital. Thank you, sir, for the overview. So I think we'll take the questions at the end of the session after we accumulate all the questions. Now we will move on to the next talk. Next talk is none other than as expected from a ID clinician, Dr. Chintan Keswala. And Dr. Chintan is a infectious disease specialist in HCG Hospital, Bangalore. Dr. Chintan, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
So you
Yes,
can
Dr.
stop
Michael.
sharing, sir.
Yeah, sure. Just a minute.
Dr. Vasant Kumar, you have to stop sharing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can we change the focus to Dr. Chintan Keswala from Dr. Vasant Kumar?
I hope my slides are visible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please go ahead. So he will be talking to us on diagnosis and treatment as expected from a ID clinician. Over to you, Dr. Chintan.
Thank you, Dr. Venkatraman. Thank you, Dr. Vasant, for beautiful insight into the epidemiological part of mucor. You have set a good base for me to discuss the management of mucormycosis. As Dr. Vasant and Dr. Venkatraman has truly said, that's why I have kept this photo. This is actually the picture of a tube with growth of mucormycosis. You can see that it's not black. Okay, so we'll talk about diagnosis and treatment of mucormycosis. We'll be very specific in discussion. We'll discuss about the COVID-19 associated mucormycosis, called shortly as CAM. So we'll not discuss about the disseminated mucor or a very disease organ specific mucor, but here we'll take mucor as a rhino-orbital cerebral mucormycosis and also pulmonary mucormycosis. So I think this is the reason why this is being called black fungus. So we'll shortly discuss the pathophysiology of mucormycosis here. So whether COVID or no COVID, the pathophysiology is the same. As Dr. Vasant said, that this is a ubiquitous organism found in soil. So the portal of entry most of the time is respiratory system. And sometimes even with ingestion or in road traffic accidents, broken skin layers are also the portal of entry. But most of the time, inhaled spores are the spores which causes the active infection. So once we inhale the spores, they are trapped in the sinuses, and then in immunocompetent individuals, generally this mucor doesn't cause any invasive disease because we have active macrophages and neutrophils which blocks the replication of this fungus. But then in cases where there is hyperglycemia, neutropenia in hematological malignancy, or in graft versus host disease, these are the cases where either the function or the numbers of macrophages and neutrophils are down. That's why there is significant replication and proliferation of mucor, and that leads to very aggressive disease with angio invasion, tissue invasion, and ultimately the necrosis. In the cases, mainly what I have seen is in hematological malignancies, this can even lead to disseminated fungal infection involving more than one organ systems. So we'll first discuss about the diagnosis. So as far as this COVID-19 associated mucormycosis is concerned, we should know where, when, and how to suspect mucormycosis. So generally, in patients with COVID-19 illness, the most common presentation is rhinocerebral mucormycosis. So the initial symptoms generally are nasal bronchitis or congestion.
Chetan, your video is off.
Just a minute, sorry.
Yes. Adjust your video a little bit.
Is it okay now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Again,
Okay.
your video is going off when you're sharing your slides.
Okay.
Okay,
I don't think yeah, okay. Sure. So yeah, so we're talking about when and how to suspect COVID-19 associated mucormycosis. So in patients with COVID-19 illness, regardless of history of steroid intake, regardless of hospitalization, if this patient do develop nasal bronchitis, congestion, or any bloody nasal discharge or blackish nasal discharge, any pain in the nasal or on the facial or facial pain or numbness, or any swelling on the face or headache. Some of the patients present with orbital pain or painful loss of vision sometimes. Also, sudden loosening of tooth or toothache is also one of the initial symptoms of COVID-19 associated mucormycosis. We have been seeing few cases, though the number are less, but we have been seeing few cases of pulmonary mucormycosis associated with COVID-19 as well. So here the symptoms are persistent fever, worsening cough, and along anyway if the patients do have are actually positive for COVID-19. So these are the symptoms which will be there. But then there are some unusual symptoms which we don't see in COVID-19, like hemoptysis, or when lung CT shows a thick walled cavity with sometimes reverse halo sign and multiple nodules. So when we see multiple nodules in lung, the first thing which comes to our mind in prolonged hospitalized patient is aspergillosis. So this has to be differentiated from aspergillosis. So I think a few of the markers like galactomannan and beta-glucan can help us in ruling out aspergillus. So we are fortunate to have this global guidelines for diagnosis and management of mucormycosis, which was published for the first time 2 years back. Before that, we didn't have any global guideline. We used to have guidelines for hematological malignancy patients with mucor, but never had the guidelines which addresses the cases which we see. So we had many of the Indian authors in this guideline. So regarding the diagnosis, here when we talk about the COVID-19 associated mucormycosis, what I have been seeing, though there is no data because it will take some time to get some data, clear data regarding the cause factor, but I have not seen a single patient with normal sugar who comes this time in COVID-19 associated mucor who comes with mucormycosis. So I've seen two most common factors associated. One is history of COVID-19, regardless of doses of steroids or steroid use, regardless of admission, regardless of oxygen requirement also. But most common thing was sugar, like hyperglycemia and COVID-19. So when the patient comes with you with any like with history of COVID-19, the recent history of COVID-19, along with hyperglycemia and any of the symptoms, I think we should suspect and go ahead with the, we should have a high suspicion for mucormycosis, and we should go ahead with the further imaging. So when patient comes with the symptoms of any facial pain, sinusitis, proptosis, so the initial screening test, what I do is sugar, like random sugar levels. If they are normal and HbA1c is normal, then I think the chances of this patient having mucormycosis is negligible. And then when you find that this patient is at high risk of getting mucor, who comes with symptoms, first thing you would do is contrast enhanced CT PNS or contrast enhanced MRI. Now both have their own benefits. So contrast enhanced CT tells you the involvement of bony erosions, and any bone and mucosal involvement, where your MRI tells you about the brain and vessel involvement. So and for staging also that is important. When you suspect pulmonary mucor, the high resolution CT of the thorax is enough. Then when we see any abnormality suggestive of mucormycosis, then we should go ahead with biopsy. See, in immunocompetent patients, they also can have spores in the respiratory tract or sinuses. That doesn't mean that they have mucormycosis. So we need tissue diagnosis of mucormycosis, which shows angio or tissue invasion for the confirmed diagnosis. This serology, galactomannan and beta-D-glucan are useful to rule out the other possibilities like Aspergillus infection. And then the biopsy samples we should send for three things. First is KOH smear, second is fungal culture, and third is histopathology. Now this molecular identification, I think it is it's not there. It's not available as of I know. It's not available in the for the commercial use. So when we talk about rhinoorbital cerebral mucormycosis, as I already told, the imaging studies are not very specific, but we need tissue diagnosis. And MRI helps in identifying the intradural and intracranial extent of the disease, cavernous sinus thrombosis, and also a thrombosis of internal carotid artery. For pulmonary mucormycosis, this picture is of one of our patients who is being treated for pulmonary mucormycosis. If you can see here, there is a huge cavity. In cavity, this is the area where you can see slightly, ground glassing, and followed by the huge wall of the thick cavity wall. So this is called a reverse halo signs, where the thick cavity is there, and inside the thick cavity, thick walled cavity, there is some ground glassing, which shows the hemorrhage and necrosis. So, which are the indicators for poor prognosis and mucormycosis we should know before treating? So, delay in the therapy of more than 6 days has been proven to be important indicator for poor prognosis. The second is symptomatic intracranial involvement, then bilateral sinus involvement, even orbital involvement is one of the poor prognostic signs, and underlying malignancy like hematological malignancy like leukemia. For management of after diagnosis, for treatment of mucormycosis, we have to have a multidisciplinary team, including ENT surgeons, skull-base surgeon, neurosurgeons, and ophthalmologists. These are the surgical team, including maxillofacial surgeons, physician intensive care specialists. So it has to be a multidisciplinary team which should work for this mucormycosis, because not only medical surgical therapy, not only surgical therapy, nothing works, nothing alone works. So this should be the thing with which we should go ahead. I spoke about the importance of early treatment. So and this is the small prospective study which was done, which was published in CID in 2008. Here they actually had observed the patients from 1993 to 2006. And if you can see the predictors of mortality, the later the treatment, the mortality is high, and that mortality was almost double. So if in the case where treatment was started in less than 6 days of diagnosis, the mortality was around 40 to 50%, which doubled after if the treatment was started after 6 days. So when we talk about the treatment, there are multiple targets in Mucor for the therapeutic indication. So first is the polins, means amphotericin molecules, which binds to ergosterol in the cell wall of the fungus and creates a pores, which ultimately leads to leakage of the important electrolytes and ultimate death of the fungal cell. Then second is the azoles, which blocks the synthesis of ergosterol. So here posaconazole and isavuconazole comes. And third is echinocandin. Now, if you remember this echinocandin, how does this echinocandin work? It works by inhibiting the cross-linking of beta-D-glucan. If you remember, the beta-D-glucan is one of the tests by which we actually rule out Mucor. So if beta-D-glucan is positive, we actually rule out Mucor. But then there is a single species of Mucor which is called Rhizopus oryza, in which the cell wall has beta-D-glucan, and where in the specific species echinocandin may work as an adjuvant therapy, but not in others. So there is only single species. If we have speciation, then we can use echinocandin in those cases along with amphotericin B. Then, we come back to global guidelines for the diagnosis and management of mucormycosis. So we talked about diagnosis from this guidelines recently, and now we'll talk about the treatment. So the first line treatment has always been liposomal amphotericin B since years, and even when we didn't have a liposomal amphotericin B, the amphotericin B deoxycholate used to be the drug of choice. If you see this red box which says the avoid slow escalation of doses. Why? Because we need some steady state concentration in the tissue to work against amphotericin B, which doesn't happen when we slowly de-escalate the doses. So it's strongly contraindicated to do slow escalation of doses. From the first day itself, we have to give the adequate dose of the amphotericin B. If brain is involved, the dose as high as 10 milligram per kg per day has been tried in small case series. Again, here the chances of renal injury is bit higher, maybe 3 or 4-fold higher. But then also this has been tried and has been recommended in patients with brain involvement. If there is pre-existing renal compromise, then the alternate therapy like isavuconazole or posaconazole can be used. But what if there is no pre-existing renal compromise? Then this comes as a moderate recommendation, isavuconazole or posaconazole. But the treatment of choice remains liposomal amphotericin B. And then now this is interesting that now it has been told to avoid amphotericin B deoxycholate at any cost. So it has been said in this guideline that use amphotericin B deoxycholate only when there is no other choice. So this is an interesting in vitro study where they had looked at the MICs for different mucus species for amphotericin B, posaconazole, and isavuconazole, along with some other antifungals. If you can see here, the MIC for isavuconazole has been a bit higher, even higher than posaconazole. But then I'm not very sure that whether we can replicate this in the real world data, because isavuconazole seems to be working. The second thing is the MIC breakpoint which was taken here for isavuconazole was actually not for mucor, it was for aspergillosis. So the limitations of the study was MIC breakpoint for mucorales was not there. So only aspergillus MIC breakpoints were used. As I said, this data is in vitro. So a clinical response, the real life experience may be different. But then one thing was very sure that only 3 drugs are there which can be used against mucorales as of now. So first is amphotericin B, second is posaconazole, and isavuconazole. So now if we talk about liposomal amphotericin B, the pros are it is less nephrotoxic and can be given at a higher dose of 5 or 10 milligram per kg sometimes. But the problem is similar infusion related toxicity as amphotericin B deoxycholate, and all the liposomal formulations are not same. So it changes brand to brand, and it's very difficult to judge the doses and toxicity based on different brands. Then what about the other amphotericin B formulations? We have been seeing this lipid complex, colloidal dispersion, and then age-old amphotericin B deoxycholate. So do we have any head-to-head study comparing all this? Yes, there is a small study actually published in early 2000 where they had actually compared amphotericin B deoxycholate, liposomal ampho, and lipid complex. So if you see the chances of the odds of getting severe renal disease is almost similar in amphotericin B deoxycholate and lipid complex and colloidal dispersion. Whereas it's the odds of getting severe renal disease is quite low in liposomal amphotericin B. So, and interestingly, the severe nephrotoxicity correlated well with the mortality. So that was one of the important predictor of death. So higher the nephrotoxicity, the more the chances of mortality. Now, what about the other options for treatment? Because working in oncological settings, for me, treating the mucormycosis like disseminated mucormycosis or CNS mucormycosis used to be the challenge. But now this is a different challenge where even this drugs, liposomal amphotericin B or even amphotericin B deoxycholate are not available. Then what to do when these drugs are not available? Forget about the nephrotoxicity, forget about the other toxicity or even the efficacy. So can we use isavuconazole, posaconazole as a primary agent to treat mucormycosis? Do we have data? So there is very scarce data regarding use of isavuconazole or posaconazole as a primary treatment. So only a prospective study which has compared the amphotericin B and isavuconazole is a single arm open label trial with only 37 patients, out of which in 21 patients, isavuconazole was given as a primary therapy. And these 21 patients, they compared with histological control from Fungiscope registry. So what we can see here is the all-cause mortality was comparable. Even if you take hematological malignancy, severe disease or mild disease or surgical treatment, the mortality was comparable between isavuconazole and amphotericin B group. But the problem exists in the name of the study itself. It is a single arm open label trial and case control analysis. So there is, and it's very small. The numbers are very small to go with use of isavuconazole with this much of confidence. I think this is the best time to generate good data on the treatment of mucormycosis, because we have not seen many randomized controlled trial for mucormycosis. The reason being, the numbers are very small in Western world, and India also. The diagnosis and the data collection has been a problem. Now, what about posaconazole? So, posaconazole has been widely used as mold prophylaxis, as everyone knows. In all hematological malignancy patients post-transplant, we use posaconazole as a prophylaxis. It has also been used as maintenance therapy after giving 4 to 6 weeks of amphotericin B. But what about the primary treatment? So there are only few retrospective analyses supporting its use in salvage therapy. Again, not as a primary treatment. So no evidence supporting its use as a primary agent. So now we'll come again to the guidelines. So first choice, liposomal amphotericin B. The minimum dose should be 5 milligram per kg per day. Dose lesser than this, I think it's a waste. The second thing is isavuconazole or posaconazole when if liposomal amphotericin is not available or a patient has pre-existing renal compromise. And then response assessment at every week or at least every 10 days by imaging. And also what we have been doing is repeat endoscopy and if needed debridement every 3-4 days. And if the disease is stable or partial response, we continue the same therapy. If the disease is progressive, then we have to change the therapy either from liposomal to isavuconazole or posaconazole or from azoles to cholins. And if there is toxicity, again we will have to change. We have only 2 groups of drugs, so no fourth option. So this was about the treatment of mucormycosis, but there are still few unanswered questions. First is role of combination therapy. So as of now, there is no any clear-cut data supporting the role of combination therapy. There are few retrospective case series with 5 or 6 patients which has showed some benefit with combination of amphotericin B and echinocandins, but no robust data. Second, role of retroorbital amphotericin B injections. I think this has been tried this time widely across the across the nation in many centers. And but before this COVID-19 associated mucormycosis came, I could see only 2 case reports of with retroorbital amphotericin B being published. So I think we'll get some more data at the end of this epidemic regarding the role of retroorbital amphotericin B. And what about the duration of therapy? Now again, this guideline doesn't say define the duration of therapy. So what guideline says is until the stable disease is achieved, you need to give IV therapy followed by the maintenance therapy, depending upon the response. So it can be 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months also. So everything depends on the response to therapy. With this, I'll conclude. So the concluding remarks are just like COVID-19 associated mucormycosis. It's an emerging problem. Incidence is increasing across India in COVID-19 patients. The hyperglycemia and use of immunosuppressive drug are major risk factors. There is no specific biomarker for the early diagnosis of mucormycosis. And speciation and susceptibility is also not available in most of the centers, but then rhizopus species are the most common. Preventive measures: not to get COVID by COVID vaccine, rationalizing treatment, and proper hygiene measures. High level of suspicion in susceptible patient is of the paramount importance, because mortality increases with the duration from increases from time to time of diagnosis to treatment. The key factors determining the prognosis of invasive mucormycosis is early treatment, surgical excision. It's of prime importance. Site of infection is also important. Mucus species and underlying host factors. Also, affordability with liposomal amphotericin B has been a problem. And some new strategies with regard to combination therapy or reducing the duration of therapy is required. It's a need of the hour. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chintan, for that overview of management and diagnosis. Now we will go to more specific topic like rhino cerebral mucormycosis. We have an eminent speaker for that, Dr. Matthew Dominic, who is a ENT head and neck surgeon, and also he is an expert in cochlear implants. He works for Medical Trust Hospital, Kochi. Welcome you, sir. Dr. Matthew, over to you.
Yeah, Dr. Matthew, you have to unmute yourself.
Can we have Dr. Matthew on the screen, please? Dr. Matthew, can you unmute yourself?
No, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Okay, and can you see my screen?
Yes.
Hello, good evening. It's been two wonderful talks that we have had. I am Dr. Matthew Dominic. I am an ENT surgeon. I work at Medical Trust Hospital in Kochi, in Kerala. Now, Kochi, as you can see in the map, is the middle, that's in the blue one. We have an area of about 3,000 square kilometers, and we have about a population of 34 lakhs. Now, most of the information on mucormycosis and all those things we actually get from the newspapers and from scientific journals. And as per a newspaper clipping from the 31st of May 2021, Kochi has had about, Ernakulam district has about 10 cases of mucormycosis so far. And they are expecting the cases to go up to about 50 in the next 3 weeks. It's actually in sharp contrast to what is happening in India, in the northern states of India. We have been inundated with mucormycosis cases. We have actually touching about 12,000 cases as of now, and I think it's a very conservative estimate. My job today is to actually present some cases to illustrate the mucormycosis. Just to illustrate that mucormycosis was there even before the current COVID scenario. The first cases that happened to us came to us in 2017. He came in May 2017. He was a 52-year-old male. He was a hypertensive, hypothyroid. He was not a known diabetic. He came with very severe right hemicranial headache, facial pain radiating to the right ear and to the teeth. His nasal septum was deviated to the right side. The nasal mucosa was inflamed. There was thick mucin medial to the right middle turbinate. He's saying mucin, not mucus. Mucin is usually seen in allergic fungal rhinosinusitis, and we took the diagnosis allergic fungal rhinosinusitis. He was admitted. Routine investigations were ordered for. To our horror, the random blood sugar was 976. This was a previously undiagnosed diabetic with a sugar level of 976. That's the highest I had ever seen. We called for rhino endocrinology help. They came, they started the patient on insulin infusion and controlled the sugar. For his sinusitis, we put him on parenteral antibiotics. The nose is cleaned every day and with the help of the endoscope. But in spite of that, there was no improvement in his symptoms. So we took him up for surgical clearance for functional endoscopic sinus surgery. There is thick. We took a scan, but the scan is not available. That had shown opacification of the right sphenoid sinus. And on surgery, there is thick purulent discharge from the right sphenoid sinus. The anterior wall of the right sphenoid sinus is sequestrated. There is fungal ball, granulations, and polyp in the right sphenoid sinus. We did an extensive debridement. We took out all the granulations, polyp, and cleared everything till we saw normal mood. In spite of this, there is no improvement in his symptoms. We asked for a neurology opinion. There is no neurological deficit. The neurologist requested an MRI to rule out paracrine involvement. The MRI was done 4 days after surgery. It only showed post-surgery status of the sinuses. There is no extra sinus involvement and there is no intracranial involvement. By this time, the histopathology arrived. It was suggestive of mucormycosis with pauciseptate hyphae with right angle branching and tissue invasion. As the previous speakers had mentioned, Vasanth had put up the same slide. The difference between the aspergillus and mucor, there is septations in aspergillus, not many septations in mucor, and the branching is of acute angle in aspergillus and obtuse angle in mucormycosis. We started the patient on amphotericin 5 mg per kg body weight. This is continued for about 21 days. Slowly his creatinine levels were increasing. We tried pre and post treatment injection hydration, but this did not work. The nephrologists were not very happy with the rising creatinine levels. He was started onto the posaconazole suspension, 40 mg twice a day. We repeated after about 4-5 months, we repeated endoscopic look. There was hardly some polypoid tissue in the previous chest cavity. Histopathology did not show any evidence of fungal elements. He is from around our hospital, so he comes up for follow-up. For any of his medical conditions, he is coming to us. He had a triple vessel disease extending in 2018. He neglected his diabetes and he came for diabetes control in 2020. He is alive and well and there is no recurrence. With the current scare on black fungus, he is now an ambassador for black fungus survivors. He's been called for talks to say that this is all we have. Early treatment probably will not be as detrimental as we read it in the paper. So he's an ambassador for black fungus. Now the second case was a 47-year-old female, a housewife. She was the wife of a driver, so you know the economic, this one is not very good. She was a diabetic on insulin for the last 6 years. On the 16th of October 2020, she had something like a upper respiratory tract infection, a bit of fever, rhinorrhea, cough, and sore throat, for which she went to the local hospital. As is the norm, she was treated with antibiotics, but there was no improvement in her symptoms. In fact, it was worsening. She had drowsiness. She had discharge from the eye. She went to the hospital again. They admitted her for evaluation. They did the COVID test. This was negative. CT scan of the sinuses showed pansinusitis with orbital cellulitis. CT brain was normal. CT thorax showed bilateral lung infiltrates. This is the CT scan of the sinuses. You can actually see this is sphenoid sinus with opacification. These are the ethmoid sinuses with opacification. And he is actually seeing this one going into the orbit also. As there was no improvement with the treatment that she is getting in the local hospital, she wanted to come to a bigger hospital. She came to us on the 10 days after the initial onset of symptoms. On admission, she was febrile, oxygenation was normal, she was drowsy, she was moving all the four limbs. Both peoples were non-reacting. Her abdomen was distended, she had bilateral crepes. With the diagnosis of viral pneumonia, pansinusitis, opial cellulitis, septic encephalitis, she was admitted under pulmonology in the intensive care unit. We also have a multidisciplinary management of patients. So she was seen by the intensivist. He again asked for routine blood investigations, fungal culture, blood culture, procalcitonin. He suggested antifungals. And he also asked for an MRI brain with orbit. We as the ENT surgeons, we were called in. There was blackish discharge in the nasal cavity. There was slough on the hard palate. She had proptosis, and both the pupils were non-reactive. We made a clinical diagnosis of mucormycosis. In any of the slough, this was actually seen in the intensive care unit. And from there, whatever slough we could get, we collected it and sent for histopathology and culture. Now there was a dilemma. We put our heads together. We thought it was clinically, it was mucormycosis. But the definitive diagnosis was going to come in about 4 to 5 days with the culture and the histopathology. We didn't think that we had the time to wait for that one. Her renal functions are normal, electrolytes are also normal. So after counseling the patient and the relatives, we started on amphotericin B. MRI brain revealed infarcts in the frontal lobe, in the parietal lobe, in the occipital lobe, in the caudate nucleus, gangliocapsular region also. You can actually see that one, infarcts there, infarcts here also. There is orbital extension of the sinus infection. This is the sphenoid sinus. MRI shows opacification of the orbital sinus, opacification of the ethmoidal sinus with involvement of the orbit also. Test-wise, when she came in on the 26th, we had done an RT-PCR. This is negative. We repeated RT-PCR on the 2nd of November. That was also negative. Total count remained high. It was 20,000 to start with, went up to 24, and then came down to 16, but still high. The glycemic control was also not very good. When she came in, she had an HbA1c of 14.1, and the sugars remained high. The anti-inflammatory markers also remained high. Her RFT and electrolytes were normal. There was a retinal detachment. The nasal tissue fungal culture came on the 2nd. This is suggestive of rhinopus. We posted her for debridement, but owing to financial constraints, decided to go to the government medical college. There, the 4th test, COVID was positive. Unfortunately, the best efforts of the team, of all the team that is involved and the medical college team, they could not save her life, and she expired 2 days later on the 6th of November 2010. This is the last case. This came just this afternoon, showing an increase in the incidence of COVID. This is a 60-year-old female, uncontrolled diabetes mellitus, hypertension, bronchial asthma. She just had headache for 3 days, and 1 day later she had proptosis and sudden loss of vision, and she had been vomiting for the last 2 days. She was seen in the local hospital. A rapid antigen test was done. This is negative. CT brain was taken. That is normal, but the visible parts of the paranasal sinus in the CT brain showed a opacification of the left ethmoid and sphenoid sinus with extension to the orbital apex. You can see that this is CT scan. This is ethmoidal sinuses, part of the maxillary sinus, sphenoid sinus, and extension into the orbit. She was seen by the ophthalmologist locally. She also did a repeat rapid antigen test. This was also negative. There is proptosis of the left eye with ptosis. There is only perception of light on the left eye with RAPD. The ophthalmologist made a diagnosis of orbital apex syndrome with mucormycosis, and she has been referred to our hospital. She reached the casualty this afternoon. We have advised admission. The antigen test The third test in 2 days has come positive. She is awaiting further management. From the knowledge that we have, we will probably take her up tomorrow morning for debridement. To conclude, the reported prevalence of mucormycosis is around 70 times higher in India than the global data. It is about 70 times higher. We are aware of that, and the number of cases in the COVID scenario is coming up very high. The awareness among us, among the treating physicians, has gone up. We are now aware. It is not like the 2017 case that we had, the one case that I am having now. The awareness has increased. There are so many talks on mucormycosis. But the morbidity and mortality is still high. The patients are coming late, and because of low affordability, patients going to lesser and smaller hospitals, maybe because of that, the morbidity and mortality is still high. In this COVID scenario, there should be high index of suspicion for mucormycosis. There should be early surgical intervention. Probably for the second case, we waited a little longer. And third case that we are having, we probably take the patient as early as possible. There should be surgical clearance to healthy bone. That is the one that we had in the first case. We went in, cleared out everything that was there, came up to the healthy bone, and this should be followed up by medical treatment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Wonderful, brisk case presentations. I think that actually shows the horizon of the coverage. So we have some interesting questions in our mind. So if we go back to the first presentation related to the epidemiology, can I have my screen on board, or can I be on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
On the screen, yeah.
So to go to the first speaker, so Dr. Vasant Kumar, so we all have that statistical data that around 70 times we are more cases or are more prone for having this mold in any of our Indian settings. And that too more specifically Rajasthan, Gujarat, all to be considered on some form of endemic areas for the sports. So what do you think the reason why India being a predominant contributor for the mold? So what made India maybe leading maybe the case numbers, or why we have such a endemicity with the molds of mucormycosis? What is your take with that kind of epidemiological information?
Yeah, basically these mucormycosis is present, it's ubiquitous, it's present everywhere, not only in the hospital settings, but also it was previously present. But mainly because of this immunosuppressions, especially due to COVID, that is one of the reasons. COVID per se can cause immunosuppression. And next is the extensive use of steroids on immunosuppressants, especially like tocilizumab or bevacizumab. And these steroids, especially when used for not only for the specific period of time, like if you use steroids for weeks or months and at higher dosage, there is increased surge. So, and third is the uncontrolled diabetes and with ketoacidosis. So the patient complaints is not good. So it's like a combination of all the three factors: COVID and patient uncontrolled diabetes and extensive use of prolonged high dose of pulse dose of steroids everywhere to abort the cytokine storm. There is an emerging rise in the case of mucor. So, and another thing is now the awareness, as Dr. Dominic rightly pointed out, awareness among the public is has recently increased. So the number of cases has been reported also has increased. So early diagnosis and treatment, and so picking up this black fungus, which is colloquially called, so has increased. So that is I think that is the main reason behind this increase in the mucormycosis.
What is your take, Chintan, on this? Like why India being on the map of this mucormycosis? And even though we say similar kind of cases in West, if you see United States of America, we have equal number or more number of cases than us in the last 1 year or so. But the mucor being never the same kind of challenge there. They had a different problems of increased mortality and high fatality rate, but not mucor. We have came to a stage where we so got out of stock of antifungals. So what do you think is the challenge here in India?
Yeah. So in India, even if you talk about even before 1 minute, yeah. So even before COVID, we used to have, as Dr. Dominic said, we our prevalence of the disease or incidence is like 70 times more than the world.
What do you think? Why do
So
India
why?
have?
So India is the diabetic capital of the world. Even the number of diabetics, you see the numbers of cases in Gujarat, Maharashtra, and Rajasthan. If you see the cases of diabetes there, it's even higher. So this is one of the reasons. Second reason, I feel that I have come across one of the studies also where in soil the spore counts of mucor is higher in India than other countries. So these are the two major reasons I feel that it is responsible for high number of cases.
Yeah, what is your take, Matthew Dominic? So what is your take on this?
See, what I would say is that, see, this is actually not COVID, this one. COVID has actually increased it.
Yeah.
Even if you take the one
Normal
before,
time.
if you take before COVID,
Yes.
60% of the cases were in India. And then you had US and Australia. They formed only about 19%. We are talking about pre-COVID times. We are not talking about COVID times.
True.
So obviously, I don't think diabetes is the only reason. Probably the fact that our climate and all these things, they are most. It is just a theory that I am purporting. Probably the prevalence of the mucor is more in India because probably the hot, humid climate, etc. We should be having that one. Then of course there is an increase, there's a surge in number of diabetic cases. These two reasons are the reason why we had COVID before. And of course now with the COVID, with the use of steroids, high dose of steroids, oxygen, etc., that is why we are having COVID. That is what I think is happening.
Yeah, I think somewhere we are there, sir. I think the spores, this molds, spores in the soil are much higher in Rajasthan, Gujarat, and those areas. They are known even in India. These are the parts where these molds are considered to be in higher proportion in soil, and that may lead to also increase in number. And add-on risk factors we all know as diabetic is the leading risk factor, which actually commonly add on to that contribution. So the second part is during the last probably 2 months, there is a havoc around with antifungals being out of stock. So what is your take on that? Was that kind of a sudden surge in the number and we never expected that, or generally the antifungals are not in that number? Because we could get steroids which are required in so many vials. We could get low molecular heparin, we could get remdesivir, we could get many other drugs which were needed in many folds, maybe 100 to 1,000 times more. But whereas in few hundred cases of antifungals, maybe mucormycosis cases, we just out of stock of antifungals. What could be the reason for that?
I think that has to come from the pharmaceutical.
PSV, yeah.
They have to say that because as such to begin with, we were not using that much of antifungals. The only case I had seen in the last 5 years, just one case I had seen mucormycosis in the last 5 years. Now that you're coming, and so probably the use of amphotericin B has not been there as much. Probably, I think the pharmaceutical company might be able to give us an answer about that one.
Possibly the manufacturing or the stocking may not be in a great volumes or great quantities because of its utility and usage being not that in high volume. So maybe that just exhausted the existing, and the next batch of manufacturing will take obviously its own time to get. And probably we are receiving this higher number of batches across the globe. I think from United States in recently we almost got few thousands of liposomal vials in the recent times, whatever news I was hearing about. So the other part is during this pandemic, there were a lot of alternatives. Antifungals came into play. Even deoxycholate was out of stock. We happened to use isavuconazole and fosconazole, as you rightly pointed out. Both of the drugs were never used as a primary therapy. At least fosconazole was always used as a continuation therapy or in the prophylaxis. But isavuconazole, yes, was in recent times had some promising results, particularly along with aspergillosis also. Whenever we were in doubt between a mold, whether it is a mucor or aspergillosis with the same reverse hollow sign with the lung. So sometimes isavuconazole can play a role there to be covering both of them. What do you think its role in those situations? in absence of amphotericin in pandemic situations? Dr. Chintan.
Yeah. So isavuconazole, yeah, definitely. We have also used in few patients where renal functions was a problem. Isavuconazole we have used successfully, but I have never used posaconazole before this. But now I have started using posaconazole also where when liposomal M4 deoxycholate or isavuconazole is not available. It will be very early to say whether it works or not, but it's been like 15-20 days. Like my oldest patient for this COVID associated mucormycosis is 25 days on posaconazole from the day one, and two imaging follow-up images and also multiple endoscopies. He's doing well. So it will be very early to say, but I think we'll generate a good data out of this epidemic of mucormycosis regarding the use of this alternative agents.
Yeah, Dr. Chintan, whenever you actually treat this mucormycosis, you become a very costly ID specialist or a costly intensivist. The reason is the cost of just 5 milligrams to 10 milligram per kg body weight. If a 60 kilo patient comes somewhere around 300 to 600 milligrams, each 50 milligram vial costs you around 5,000 rupees. That lands up to 60,000 to 30,000 rupees per dose of liposomal M4B, and we are talking about 4 to 6 weeks of therapy. As Dr. Matthew was rightly pointing out, the finances being a big challenge. Even you talk about isavuconazole, the cost remains the same, maybe 30 to 60,000 in the first 2 days. Maybe later on it will drop to 10,000 because the first 2 days the dose will go in thrice a day for the 2 days and then you drop. My question to you is, you put a slide saying deoxycholate has a big no.
Surprisingly, I said surprisingly, deoxycholate has I have been using this deoxycholate since many years. Maybe in our, I think in our postgraduate times also, we have been using deoxycholate only because patients were not able to afford. And then we have been, I think patients, at least 50 to 60% of the patients tolerate it well.
Yes.
So yeah. So I think
so. The point was same. Like as Dr. Matthew pointed out, much before our so-called sophisticated corporate practice, when we were doing our post-graduation or medical education days in many of our educational institution, patients, I think 99% of patients cannot afford to either isavuconazole or a liposomal amphotericin B. So many of them received amphotericin deoxycholate, amphotericin B, that to a prolonged infusion. And rightly as pointed out, we also had a series of around 30 cases during my last hospital stay, the hospital practice, where the 80% of the cases were referred to me by my ENT surgeon, where he got this mucormycosis diagnosis during his first endoscopy and found to have a histopathological or KH mount response, and then we treated with in that 80%, in those cases of 28 to 30 cases, we have to forcefully use in around 50-60% deoxycholate because the family was not able to afford after a week or 10 days. And many of them had AKI, many of them had hypokalemia, many of them had challenge, but over a time, most of them slowly recovered back their AKI. And they did well. I think the only key point what I noticed there is the amphotericin is too costly for most of our common population. But the surgical debridement, as rightly pointed out, aggressive surgical debridement, repeated debridement probably will take out the fungal burden from these tissues, and the need of higher doses of antifungal may be cut down. What is your take, Dr. Matthew, on that? Can we do an aggressive surgical debridement and cut down the required load of antifungals in them?
See, we are actually gaining experience now. And the current scenario in Kerala is go in, take out everything, cut down to normal bone. That removes all the debris, all the fungus physically that is being removed. And that will definitely reduce the load. And that will reduce the amount of antifungal that is required.
And you rightly pointed out, sir, whenever we had a limited sinosal, orbital, we had a good outcome. But whenever it had invaded the cranium, whenever it got to gut, whenever it has got to lung, whenever it has got to disseminated, the mortality remained very high irrespective, because probably the surgical debridement is not that easy in those parts. When you are into cranium, when you are into a gut, when you're into a lung, the debridement always has a limitation, not like sinuses where you can scoop out or enucleate an eye, where your surgical probably clearance will be much better. That's why the rate of the mortality was quite high in them. I think with the limitation of time, we had a very good discussion, enlightening many of us in learning experience for this. I thank all the speakers. I think we carry the summary and message that India being a country where these spores are high, we create almost 60% of the disease burden. And even pre-COVID time, we were leading the world in not just diabetic, but in the mucormycosis cases. And this COVID surge, along with probably the steroid use, and we also look at CD4 and CD8 cell related immunocompromised state, immunomodulator use, rampant use of steroid in unindicated situations, prolonged use, and uncontrolled glycemic states, not just in diabetic, also non-diabetic patient receiving steroid causing a hyperglycemia, also pre-diabetic getting dysglycemics during this COVID who are not monitoring themselves, was a challenge, and that made this black fungus or so-called mucormycosis has been a rampant havoc in the recent times. Even though there were many debates related to humidification, we had recent data which actually goes against it. We also tried in all our humidifiers, we couldn't get any information from that. Yes, some of the dirty linens been contributed in earlier times in hospital settings, but this time probably this glycemia, immunity modulation during this COVID time had played a role. As pointed out, probably the liposomal may be the choice, but in situations, in times where there is a affordability challenge, the deoxycholate can play a role. Isoconazole, fosaconazole has been used in Indian scenario. Probably we'll have to wait to see whether its role has anything. And at the end, the surgical debridement is the key, and it has to be done aggressively, early, with the suspicion, and get a histopathology, and that will probably give and confirm your diagnosis. And repeated relook into the tissues and relook into the organs to see whether we need a repeat aggressive debridement is the key. With this, I thank all the panelists who has enlightened us, Dr. Matthews, Dr. Chintan, and Dr. Vasant Kumar, and I thank and I hand over this to Saswat Banerjee ji. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So on behalf of Bharat Serum and Vaccine, we are also thankful to our moderator for the evening, Dr. Venkatraman. We are also thankful to our speakers for the evening, Dr. Basant, Dr. Chintan, and Dr. Dominic Matthew. So with this, we'll continue to do such type of program for awareness program. And thanks for your support once again. And we are also thankful to all the participants who have been part of this program all throughout for last 1.5 hours or so.
Thank you.
Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you also. Thank you.